All right, get ready, because today we're going deep, deep into power dynamics. Like, how do people gain control over others? But we're getting kind of tactical with this one. We're using military history for this.
Mhm.
And specifically, Robert Greene's The 33 Strategies of War.
Yeah, might sound a little intense using, war strategies, but you'd be surprised how relevant these battlefield tactics can be to, like, everyday conflicts, even power struggles you see all the time.
I know, right? It's like Sun Tzu's got some serious wisdom for dealing with office politics. Who knew?
Exactly. So let's jump right into our first strategy. Knowing your enemy green kicks things off with this really fascinating story about William McNaughton and the British invasion of Afghanistan back in the 19th century.
Okay, yeah. Remind me about that one.
Well, McNaughton's big mistake, he totally misjudged the Afghan people. He thought they'd just be cool with British influence, like they'd want to adopt all these civilized customs. He even tried to introduce, get this, horse racing and theaters.
Wow. Talk about a culture clash.
Yeah, total misfire. And there's a huge lesson here for all of us. We tend to see the world through our own lens, like assuming everyone thinks and feels the way we do.
So instead of trying to win over the Afghans with horse races, McNaughton should, I don't know, maybe try to understand their culture more, like their values, motivations, that kind of thing.
Exactly. You miss those differences in perspective and boom, major conflicts and misunderstandings. It's not just on battlefields either. It's in our personal and professional lives too.
Makes total sense. So how do we avoid that trap? Is it just all about empathy?
Empathy is definitely a big part of it, but think of it less as like a feeling, more like a strategic tool.
Right.
You step into the other person's shoes, understand their values, fears, what they want. It's key to figuring out how they'll act, maybe even influencing them. You know that saying, to defeat the enemy, you must become the enemy.
Right. But not in a creepy way, obviously.
Of course not. It's not about agreeing with them or adopting their beliefs. It's about understanding what makes them tick. Then you can predict their moves and have a counter strategy ready. Think about a recent argument you've had. Did you really get where the other person was coming from, or were you just stuck in your own head? This deep dive is going to give you the tools to really decode people's motivations. You'll be able to see their actions coming and handle conflicts way better.
Okay, that's a game changer. But it's not enough to just understand your enemy, right? You've got to pick your battles too. Greene uses King Paris to show how chasing victory all the time can actually cost you big time.
Pyrrhus, he was this military genius, won a ton of battles against the Romans, but those wins, they came with a brutal price. Like his army was decimated, he was left super vulnerable. He even said, one more such victory and we are undone.
Wow, so he was winning battles but losing the war.
Exactly. He got so caught up in those immediate wins, so focused on the prize that he completely ignored the consequences, the long-term costs of his actions.
It's like when you win an argument, but it damages the relationship. You might win the battle, but at what cost?
Happens all the time. That desire to win, it can really mess with your judgment. So how do we avoid falling into that same trap as Paris?
Well, Greene says you got to really weigh the costs of any conflict. Not just the obvious stuff like money or time, but also the hidden costs like energy, stress, damaged relationships.
Think about it. What happens if you win? What happens if you lose? Sometimes the smartest move is to step back, disengage, find a compromise, even if it doesn't feel like a clear victory.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
Okay, let's switch gears completely. Talk about a strategy that's all about speed and surprise. Blitzkrieg. Greene brings in the master of Blitzkrieg.
Genghis Khan.
Genghis Khan, right? That guy was legendary. He just blitzed through the Khwarezmian Empire using speed and surprise to overwhelm his enemies. His strategy was slow, slow, quick, quick.
Hold on, slow, slow, quick, quick. That sounds more like a dance move than a military tactic. It does, right. But it's actually brilliant. The first slow is all about preparation, gathering intelligence. Genghis Khan's armies knew the terrain like the back of their hands. They knew their enemies' weaknesses.
So it's not just about being fast. It's about being prepared to be fast. What about the second slow?
That one's all about deception, making the enemy feel safe and secure. Genghis Khan was a master of psychological warfare. He'd often fake weakness, even retreat strategically to make his opponents underestimate him.
And then, bam, the two quicks come in, those swift attacks that catch the enemy totally off guard.
Think of it like a coiled spring suddenly released the Khwarezmian Empire, which was way bigger than the Mongols. They just crumbled under the force of those rapid attacks.
Okay, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
But it feels kind of counterintuitive in our world where everything's so fast-paced, right?
Yeah.
So where could strategic slowness be your secret weapon? Could taking a pause, gathering information, and watching your opponent actually give you the advantage? Just something to think about as we move on.
Now let's look at a strategy that's more like a well-timed counterpunch. Counterattack Greene compares Franklin D. Roosevelt's political style to jujitsu, using your opponent's force against them.
Love that analogy. So, was FDR out there judo chopping his political rivals?
Not quite, but he definitely knew how to turn their aggression against them. He'd often seem passive, even indecisive, letting his critics wear themselves out with attacks.
It's like he was absorbing their energy, waiting for the perfect moment to strike back.
Exactly. He was playing the long game. And when he did counterattack, it was with these carefully crafted policies and speeches that totally shifted public opinion.
So imagine you're in a meeting and someone's trying to steamroll their ideas through. Instead of arguing, what if you channeled your inner FDR? Absorb their energy, let them show their weaknesses, and then boom, you drop a perfectly crafted counterproposal that wins everyone over.
That's it. Sometimes the best way to win is to let your opponent overextend themselves. It's like that saying, he who strikes first often strikes last.
Okay, love that visual. Let's move on to a strategy that really grabs my attention. Deterrence Greene uses Robert the Bruce, the Scottish king, facing a massive English army.
Total underdog story. Robert the Bruce, despite being totally outmatched, he used this strategy of reverse intimidation to keep the English at bay, protect Scotland.
So he basically flipped the script and made the English think twice about attacking Scotland. How did he do that?
He made invading just way too costly. He used these hit-and-run tactics, scorched earth, burning everything as he retreated, wore down the English, totally demoralized their troops.
The English were expecting an easy win, a quick takeover. But instead, they're stuck in this long, expensive conflict going nowhere.
Right. They realized conquering Scotland would be a nightmare. It just wasn't worth it.
Amazing. So even when you're up against a giant strategic deterrence, can even the odds, it's like saying, don't mess with me, you'll regret it.
Exactly. Now, we're obviously not talking about literally burning things down if your boss is being a jerk.
Haha, yeah.
Yeah.
No arson in the workplace.
Yeah. But you can apply the same idea. Like, if someone's always pushing your boundaries, set firm limits, have clear consequences, it'll make them think twice before messing with you again.
It's like building a reputation. People will know, hey, they're nice, but they're not a pushover.
Yeah.
You cross them, there are consequences.
Exactly. You don't have to be aggressive about it either. It's more about confidence, letting people know you're not someone they can walk all over.
All right, let's get into a strategy that's all about targeting those critical weak points. Center of gravity.
Classic strategy. Greene uses Scipio Africanus, the Roman general who defeated Hannibal, to explain this one.
Oh yeah, Hannibal, the guy who marched elephants over the Alps. Bold move.
Super bold, but Scipio is even bolder. He knew fighting Hannibal head-on would be a disaster, so he went after Carthage's center of gravity, their economy.
So instead of fighting Hannibal, he went after their money. That's smart.
Right. He disrupted their supplies, messed with their trade, even caused rebellions among their allies. By targeting their wealth, Scipio forced Hannibal to leave Italy and go home to defend his own people.
Like cutting off the head of the snake.
Yeah.
You take out the source of their power, and the whole thing crumbles.
Exactly. And here's the challenge for you. Think about a situation where you're facing opposition or you're trying to reach a goal. What's the other side's center of gravity? What do they absolutely depend on? What's their weak spot? Figure that out, and you can weaken it, giving you a massive advantage.
Love that. It's not about brute force, it's about strategic thinking, hitting the pressure points. Okay, let's dive into a strategy as old as time. Divide and conquer.
Perfect example is the Athenian victory at Marathon. The general, Miltiades, used a brilliant maneuver to split the Persian forces and take advantage of their disunity.
Okay, let's hear about Miltiades' strategic genius.
So the Persians show up at Marathon with this massive army, thinking they'll crush the Athenians. But Miltiades, he's too smart for that. He comes up with this plan to trick them into dividing their forces. He leaves Athens seemingly undefended, tempting some of the Persians to attack the city directly.
So he used Athens as bait to split the Persians. That's risky.
Super risky, but it worked. Miltiades and the Athenians were then able to take on the smaller Persian force at Marathon. And get this, they won.
Wait, they won? That's incredible.
Yeah.
They were totally outnumbered. But what about those other Persians who sailed to attack Athens?
Well, after the victory at Marathon, the Athenians, these absolute champs, marched back to Athens, got there just in time to meet the returning Persian fleet. And the Persians, they saw the Athenian army ready for round two, and they just noped out of there.
Wow, talk about a close call. But this story shows an important point. By controlling the center, you can force your enemy to divide, making them weaker. And this isn't just about battlefields, right?
Nope. Think about office politics. If you're the central figure, the one everyone wants on their side, you create divisions among your rivals. They're weaker, you're more important.
Okay, that's seriously clever.
Ah.
So whether it's winning a war, dominating at work, or just winning an argument, divide and conquer is a good one to remember. And what about grand strategy?
We're talking big picture now. Greene uses Alexander the Great for this one. Not just winning battles, but achieving huge goals, reshaping the world.
Alexander the Great, yeah, that name practically screams grand strategy. What made him so good at it?
He saw the bigger picture. He connected all these seemingly random actions into one big plan to reach his ultimate goal. It wasn't just about taking cities, it was about building an empire, creating a legacy that would last for centuries.
So every action, even the ones that seemed impulsive, were all part of a bigger plan.
Exactly. He wasn't reacting to events, he was shaping them, anticipating challenges, always thinking a few steps ahead. Like a grandmaster playing chess on a global scale.
That's impressive. But how do we even begin to think like that in our everyday lives? We're not exactly leading armies across continents.
True, but the idea of grand strategy, it works for any goal you've got, whether it's launching a business, getting ahead at work, or even a major life change. You got to have that clear vision of where you want to be and then figure out how to get there, even if it means tough choices or unexpected detours along the way.
So think long term, be adaptable, don't get discouraged by setbacks.
Exactly. The road to success is rarely a straight line. There'll be obstacles, challenges, maybe even losses. But as long as you keep your eye on the prize, you can adjust, learn from your mistakes, and keep moving forward.
Okay, that's powerful. But sometimes you need to know when to step back, right? Like with non-engagement.
It was about knowing when to avoid conflict, when to bide your time. Greene brings back Mao Zedong and the Long March to explain this one.
Okay, the Long March, yeah, it was brutal, like 6,000 miles. But why would Mao choose to retreat during a revolution?
Well, Mao was up against this massive, well-equipped nationalist army. Fighting them head-on would have been suicide. So he retreated, leading his forces on this crazy, year-long journey across some of the toughest terrain imaginable.
So he retreated to save his forces and fight another day.
That's part of it, but it became this time of rebuilding and strengthening for the Communist Party. They got their act together, basically.
So he turned a retreat into a strategic advantage.
Yep. And during that retreat, Mao rebuilt his forces, got everyone on the same page, and refined his whole strategy.
So what seemed like a defeat became a strength. That's a powerful lesson.
Absolutely. So here's the question for you. When does retreat become a sign of strength? And how can you turn disengagement into an opportunity to rebuild, re-strategize, and come back even stronger?
Okay, I'm going to be thinking about that one. We've covered a lot of ground already.
We have, but this is just the start of our deep dive into Robert Greene's The 33 Strategies of War. We've barely scratched the surface of these timeless principles and how they apply to our lives.
I can't wait to uncover more of these strategies.
We'll be right back after a quick break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Let's keep diving into the 33 strategies of war.
You know, it's wild how Greene connects these military strategies to, like, everyday stuff. I never thought I'd be taking leadership advice from Genghis Khan.
Right. But it makes sense when you think about it. Leading an army, leading a team at work, the strategies, they're surprisingly similar.
Okay, so what's our next power move? What's on the strategic agenda?
Let's talk about setting the stage, calling the shots. Greene calls it control the dynamic, forcing strategies. He uses General Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox from World War II.
Rommel, yeah, the desert warfare guy.
Yeah.
He was facing some tough odds in North Africa, right?
He was often outnumbered, outgunned by the British, but he consistently outmaneuvered them.
Ow. Just pure brilliance.
Brilliance was part of it, sure. But Rommel's real genius was controlling the battlefield. He didn't just react, he dictated the pace, the direction, even the psychology of the battle.
So he was playing chess, always a few moves ahead.
Exactly. He used deception, feints, flanking maneuvers, surprise attacks, kept the British off balance.
So instead of letting the British control the fight, Rommel flipped it, forced them to react to him.
Right. He knew that by controlling the dynamic, he could overcome the British advantage in numbers and firepower. He used their caution, their methodical nature against them.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
But how do we, like normal people, control the dynamic? We're not exactly leading tanks across the desert.
Of course not. But the principles apply. Think about it. Every interaction, negotiation, conflict, it all has a dynamic, a flow of energy, a back and forth. Whoever controls that dynamic, they have the upper hand.
Okay, I'm seeing how this applies outside of the military. So how do we do it? How do we control the dynamic?
Take the initiative. For example, going into a negotiation, you set the agenda, choose the location, frame the discussion, create a subtle psychological advantage.
So set the stage, make it your home turf.
Exactly. And be proactive. Anticipate your opponent's moves, have counter strategies ready, disrupt their plans, make them react to you.
Be in the driver's seat. Shape the situation. Don't let it shape you. Love it. What's the next strategic move?
Let's talk about hitting your opponent where it hurts. Their center of gravity Greene calls it hit them where it hurts, the center of gravity strategy. We talked about this with Scipio Africanus and Hannibal.
Right. Scipio went after Carthage's economic power, their lifeline. But how do we find that center of gravity in our everyday lives?
Identify the source of their strength, their leverage, their support system. It could be their finances, their network, their reputation, even their emotional stability. Whatever it is, that's their center of gravity.
Okay, and then what? Do we just attack it head on?
Not always. Sometimes a subtle approach is better. You don't always need to destroy it, just weaken it, disrupt it, neutralize it.
So instead of a knockout punch, we're aiming for a strategic jab,
Yeah.
something to throw them off balance.
Exactly. And sometimes just knowing where that center of gravity is gives you an advantage. You can use that knowledge to influence their decisions, get what you want.
Mind-blowing. It's like having a secret weapon, knowing exactly where to strike. Okay, let's explore a strategy that might seem a bit passive. Trade space for time, the non-engagement strategy.
This one's about knowing when to step back, avoid confrontation, bide your time. We can go back to Mao Zedong and the Long March.
The Long March, right? Mao was facing a much larger enemy, so instead of fighting a losing battle, he retreated counterintuitive, but he made it work.
Exactly. He understood that sometimes the smartest move is to avoid engagement, choose your battles, wait for the right moment.
So it's not running away, it's strategic disengagement. Save your resources, regroup, come back stronger.
Think of a boxer getting pummeled. Sometimes the smartest move is to clinch, buy some time to recover, think, come up with a new plan.
Not every battle is worth fighting.
Yeah,
Sometimes walking away, even if it feels weird, is the best move.
absolutely. You're playing the long game.
Yep.
Sometimes you take a step back to take 2 steps forward.
Makes sense?
Trauma.
So how do we know when to disengage? When's it better to retreat?
Great question. Depends on the situation. No easy answer, but consider a few things. Can you actually win this fight? What will it cost you to engage? What are the benefits of stepping back?
Okay, so be strategic, calculate, don't just react emotionally.
That's the idea. It's a powerful tool, non-engagement, but it takes self-awareness, discipline, seeing the bigger picture.
Okay, next strategy lesson, please. What else can we use to level up our strategic game?
Let's talk about long-term thinking. Calculated maneuvering. Greene calls this lose battles but win the war. Grand strategy.
That sounds like a contradiction. How can you lose and still win?
The goal isn't to win every little battle, it's to achieve your overall objective. Sometimes you need to make sacrifices, concede points, even lose some fights to win the whole thing.
Like in chess, you might sacrifice a pawn to get a better position, even lose a rook to save your queen.
Exactly. It's about seeing beyond the immediate move, thinking several steps ahead.
And who better to illustrate this than Alexander the Great, right? Conquering the world, building an empire, leaving a legacy.
Alexander was a master of grand strategy. He knew winning battles was important, but it was secondary to achieving his big goals.
So he took risks, made unconventional moves, even retreated when necessary if it served his ultimate purpose.
Precisely. His actions might have seemed impulsive, but they were all part of a calculated plan.
Wow, that's foresight and discipline. But how do we apply that kind of thinking to our lives?
Think about your long-term goals. What are you passionate about? What impact do you want to make? Once you have that vision, you can start developing a grand strategy.
So have that big picture vision, your North Star.
Yeah.
It guides your decisions.
Exactly. And be adaptable. Your plans will change as things change. You'll hit obstacles, setbacks, maybe even failures. But as long as you keep your ultimate goal in mind, you can adjust, learn, and keep going.
Not rigid, but focused on that core vision while adjusting as needed.
Right? Grand strategy is about being visionary and pragmatic, daring to dream big, and having the discipline to make it happen.
Okay, let's switch gears again. Back to divide and conquer.
This one's a classic, and for good reason. It works. Greene takes us back to the Battle of Marathon, where the Athenians, outnumbered but brilliant, divided and conquered the Persian army.
Right, the Persians were overconfident, and the Athenians used that against them, splitting their forces and ultimately defeating them.
This strategy is all about using your opponent's disunity, their conflicts, their lack of coordination against them. You're turning their strengths into weaknesses.
Okay, but how do we use this in everyday life? I'm not planning on leading any armies anytime soon.
Think about situations where you're facing a united front, a group of people against you. Could be at work, in your community, even your family. Divide and conquer is about finding the cracks in their alliance, the disagreements, the tensions, and using them.
So understand the group dynamics, the relationships, the rivalries, then use that knowledge to create division, turn them against each other.
Exactly. It's a bit Machiavellian, sure, but sometimes you need to play the game to get what you want.
I could see how this would be great in a negotiation or political campaign, but any examples of how I could use this in like a normal situation?
Sure. Let's say you're trying to get a project approved at work, but some colleagues are against it. Instead of trying to convince the whole group at once, use divide and conquer win over some key individuals.
Instead of fighting the whole group, build alliances with individuals, appeal to their interests. Once I have some people on my side, it'll be easier to sway the rest.
Exactly. Be strategic, play the long game, and remember, sometimes the best way to win is to divide and conquer.
Okay, let's move on to a strategy that seems a bit more subtle psychological. Assume passive control. Forcing strategies.
This one's about influencing things without seeming like you're in control. Greene uses Franklin D. Roosevelt, who was a master at this.
FDR. Yeah, he was charismatic, persuasive, but I never thought of him as being passively in control.
It's subtle. You make your opponent feel like they're in charge while you're guiding them towards what you want.
Okay, so like a Jedi mind trick.
Kind of.
No.
You create this illusion of powerlessness, of being open to suggestion while subtly manipulating the situation.
So how did FDR do this?
He faced strong opposition from both sides, but he had this knack for making his opponents feel like they were in control, even when he was subtly pushing them towards his goals.
Like a puppet master pulling strings from behind the scenes.
In a way, yes. He'd seem like he was compromising, retreating, but it was all part of a bigger plan. He was patient, waiting for the right moment to take charge.
So not being weak, but choosing your battles, knowing when to let go to gain a bigger advantage later on.
Exactly. Passive control is a delicate dance. It takes deep understanding of psychology, reading people's motivations, and patience.
Okay, that's a lot to think about. So how do we use this in our lives?
Pick your battles. Know when to assert yourself, when to step back. Sometimes the best way to get what you want is to let the other person think they're winning while you're subtly steering them your way. It takes time to master, but once you do, it's incredibly effective for handling complex social situations and achieving your goals.
Okay, great tip. What's next?
Let's talk about using fear and uncertainty to your advantage. Greene calls this create a threatening presence, deterrence strategies.
Okay, this sounds a bit intimidating. Tell me more about this threatening presence.
It's about projecting power, unpredictability. Your opponents think twice before messing with you. Greene uses Robert the Bruce, the Scottish king facing the English.
Right, Robert the Bruce. We talked about his reverse intimidation strategy. He made attacking Scotland too risky for the English.
Exactly. He understood that even though he was outmatched, he could deter the English by making them fear the consequences.
So not actually being more powerful, but appearing more powerful, more dangerous.
Right. Create uncertainty, make your opponents hesitate.
But how do we do this in everyday life? We can't exactly threaten our coworkers.
Of course not. But we can create a threatening presence in subtle ways. Set boundaries, enforce consequences, project confidence. Let people know you're not someone to be messed with.
Stand your ground, say no, don't tolerate disrespect. Basically, build a reputation as someone who's not to be trifled with.
Exactly. You don't have to be a jerk about it. It's about being assertive, setting clear boundaries, showing that you respect yourself and expect the same in return.
Okay, so it's about inner strength, quiet confidence, commanding respect without being aggressive.
Exactly. Project an aura of power. Make people think twice before crossing you.
I'm ready for the next strategy.
Okay.
What else have we got?
Let's talk about getting to the root of the problem. Greene calls this sever the roots. Grand strategy. It's about understanding the real source of a conflict and focusing on that underlying cause.
So not just treating the symptoms, but finding the cure.
Exactly. You see the bigger picture, and sometimes the obvious solution isn't the best one.
Okay, how do we sever the roots in our lives? Any examples?
Let's say you and your partner keep arguing about the same thing, like chores or money. Instead of bickering, sever the roots would be taking a step back and asking, what's the real issue here? What's driving this conflict?
Len, dig deeper. Understand the motivations, address the core issues, not just the surface arguments.
Right. Maybe one person feels overwhelmed, unsupported. The other feels unappreciated, taken for granted. Once you understand those needs, you can have a more productive conversation, figure out how to meet each other's needs, and make things better.
Take a pause, breathe, and ask, what's really going on?
Be honest with yourself and the other person, even if it's uncomfortable.
Okay, I'm ready for our next strategic move. What else can we learn from Robert Greene?
Let's talk about deception and misdirection. Greene calls this, take the indirect route to your goal. Grand strategy.
Oh, I like this one. Sounds a bit sneaky.
It's not about being sneaky, it's about being strategic and unpredictable. Sometimes the most direct path isn't the most effective.
Okay, tell me more about this indirect route.
Greene uses Alexander the Great, who often took these roundabout routes to achieve his goals. He knew sometimes it's better to outflank your opponent, attack from an unexpected angle, create confusion.
So instead of charging straight ahead, you zigzag your way to the goal. Keep them guessing.
Exactly. Be adaptable, creative, think ahead.
But how do we use this in our everyday lives? We're not exactly leading armies.
The principle's the same. Think about a goal you have, something challenging. Instead of tackling it head on, what if you break it down into smaller steps? Take a less obvious route, but one that ultimately gets you there.
So instead of climbing Mount Everest in one go, you set up base camps along the way.
Great analogy. Or think about a negotiation where the other person is really resistant. Instead of forcing it, take a more indirect approach. Build rapport, find common ground, establish trust, then bring up the tough stuff.
Build a relationship first, then subtly guide the conversation.
Exactly. The indirect route works because it bypasses defenses, disarms resistance, and you achieve your goals with less conflict.
Brilliant. Okay, take the indirect route is going to my strategic toolkit. What's next?
Let's talk about staying grounded, focused, adaptable, even when you're winning or losing. Greene calls this combat the two dangers of grand strategy. Grand strategy.
Two dangers.
Yeah.
Sounds serious. What are they?
First, arrogance. When you're successful, it's easy to get overconfident, think you're invincible, and stop listening to advice.
Pride comes before the fall.
Exactly. Second danger, paralysis. You get overwhelmed by information, options, and you freeze up, can't decide, can't act.
Analysis paralysis. You think too much and end up doing nothing.
Right. So how do we avoid these dangers?
You said earlier it starts with humility.
Right. No matter how successful you are, you don't have all the answers. Be open to feedback, learn from mistakes, surround yourself with people who will challenge you and keep you grounded.
Be a lifelong learner. Be open to new ideas. Know that you can always improve.
Exactly. Also, set clear priorities. Focus on what's important. Don't get lost in the details.
Be strategic with your time and energy.
Right. And finally, maintain a sense of urgency. Avoid procrastination. Take action when you need to.
Be thoughtful, strategic, but also decisive and action-oriented.
It's a balance. Find that sweet spot between planning and doing.
Great advice. Okay, let's keep going with our strategic training. What's next?
Let's talk about seizing the initiative. Greene calls this keep them on their heels, forcing strategies. Be proactive, dictate the terms, don't let your opponent get comfortable.
I'm all about taking charge. This sounds like my kind of strategy. Tell me more.
Greene uses Erwin Rommel again. The Desert Fox was a master at this. He was always on the offensive, attacking, never letting his opponents get set up defensively.
So be aggressive, relentless, always moving forward.
Not necessarily aggressive, but assertive, proactive. Set the pace, control the situation, keep him off balance.
Like playing offense, not defense.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You call the shots, you're not reacting to them.
This sounds powerful for negotiations, competition. But how do we use this in our daily lives?
Be the one who reaches out, proposes ideas, takes the lead.
Yeah.
Be visible, vocal, engaged. Don't wait for things to happen.
Be a go-getter, a self-starter, someone who makes things happen.
Exactly. Create opportunities. Don't just wait for them. Be a leader, not a follower.
Love that. What's our next strategic lesson?
Let's talk about shifting the battlefield to your advantage. Greene calls it shift the battlefield, forcing strategies.
Okay, intriguing.
Yeah.
How do we shift the battlefield?
Sometimes you need to change the rules of the game. Fight on your terms. Create a situation where your strengths shine and their weaknesses are exposed.
Makes sense. But how do we actually do that?
Greene uses Hannibal, who crossed the Alps with elephants to attack Rome from an unexpected direction. He knew that fighting conventionally would be a disaster.
Right, Hannibal, the master of the unexpected. He always had these crazy tactics that threw everyone off.
Exactly. So how do we shift the battlefield in our own lives? We can't exactly bring elephants to work.
True. But I see the principle. Be creative, think outside the box, change the dynamics to your advantage.
Exactly. Sometimes the best way to win is to change the rules.
Okay, so if I'm in a negotiation where the other side has more power, instead of accepting their terms, I find a way to change the game to something I'm better at.
Right. Find that area where you have the advantage.
So instead of feeling trapped, you reframe the situation, change the context, create new rules that work for you.
Shifting the battlefield is about being adaptable, creative, resourceful, finding that strategic edge to outmaneuver your opponent and get what you want.
Okay, loving these strategy lessons. What's next?
Let's talk about exploiting your opponent's emotions. Greene calls this compel mistakes, forcing strategies.
Ooh, sounds sneaky. I'm listening.
It's not about being sneaky, it's about being strategic and understanding how emotions affect decisions.
Okay, so how do we compel mistakes?
Understand their psychological weaknesses. Are they impulsive? Do they get angry easily? Are they overly cautious? Once you know their triggers, you can exploit them.
So push their buttons, make them react emotionally, not rationally. Is that
Now,
what
if they're hot-headed, provoke them, knowing they'll overreact and mess up.
Machiavellian, but effective?
Yeah.
What if they're cautious, indecisive?
Create urgency, pressure them to make a decision they don't want to make.
Play mind games, basically.
Not exactly mind games,
Mm.
but you're using their personality and emotions to influence them.
Be observant, see how they react, and use that knowledge.
The key is to stay calm while they lose it. That gives you the advantage, and they'll make mistakes that benefit you.
Keep your cool, and you'll rule.
Exactly. Let's go back to a strategy we touched on before, but it's so important. Assume passive control. Forcing strategies.
Right, we talked about FDR and how he mastered influencing without seeming to be in control.
It's powerful, and it's not just for politicians. We can all use passive control.
So be subtle, strategic, play the long game.
Exactly. Let the other person think they're in charge while you guide them to what you want.
Okay, I'm starting to get it. Another example of how I could use this.
Let's say you're in a meeting, someone's pushing an idea you don't like. Instead of fighting them head-on, which could cause conflict, try a passive approach.
So instead of saying, no way, that's terrible, I say something like, interesting idea. I'd like to hear more about how you see that working.
Exactly. You seem open, disarm them, create space for discussion, and then you subtly guide the conversation. Ask questions, raise concerns, steer the group towards a better solution.
Be strategic, diplomatic, understand persuasion.
Exactly. Passive control is about using your influence subtly to achieve your goals without unnecessary conflict.
Okay, valuable skill. What's next?
Let's talk about fear and uncertainty again. Greene calls this create a threatening presence. Deterrent strategies. Remember Robert the Bruce?
Yeah, the King of Scotland.
Yeah.
He used reverse intimidation to discourage the English. Even though he was outmatched, he made them think twice about attacking.
Exactly. It's a strategy for all areas of life. Not about physical intimidation, but about confidence and strength.
Set boundaries. Stand up for yourself. Don't be a pushover.
Right. Build a reputation as someone who's not to be messed with.
Okay, but how do we do that without being a jerk?
It's not about being a jerk. It's about being assertive, having boundaries. Let people know you respect yourself and expect the same in return.
Okay, so it's about inner strength, quiet confidence, earning respect without being aggressive.
Exactly. Project that aura of power. Make people think twice.
All right, what's our next strategy lesson?
Let's revisit sever the roots. Grand strategy.
We talked about this one, right? Understanding the root causes of a conflict and focusing on that.
Exactly. See past the symptoms, address the real problem. Works for personal relationships, business, even global politics.
Okay, so how do we actually sever the roots? Give me an example.
Imagine a recurring problem at work. Could be communication issues, lack of resources, personality clashes. Instead of just reacting, step back and ask, what's the root cause here?
Be a detective. Investigate the situation. Find the hidden factors.
Right. Maybe it's unclear roles or a lack of trust within the team. Once you identify the root cause, you can find a better solution.
Not just putting out fires, but preventing them.
Exactly. Be proactive, strategic, and know that the most effective solution might not be the obvious one.
Okay, let's move on to a strategy that sounds a bit more strategic and maybe a little sneaky. Take the indirect route to your goal. Grand strategy.
This one's about being flexible, creative. The most direct path isn't always the best.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more about this indirect route.
Greene uses Alexander the Great again. He'd take these seemingly roundabout paths to reach his objectives. Sometimes it's better to go around the obstacle, not over it.
So, like in a negotiation, instead of going head to head, you find common ground, build trust, then address the tough issues.
Exactly. The indirect route bypasses defenses, lowers resistance, and you achieve your goals with less conflict.
That's clever. I like it. What's next?
Let's talk about staying level-headed, even when things are going great or terribly. Greene calls this combat the two dangers of grand strategy. Grand strategy.
We talked about arrogance and paralysis before, right?
Right. Even the best strategies can be ruined by these two things.
So how do we avoid them?
Stay humble, no matter how successful you are. Remember, you don't have all the answers. Be open to feedback, learn from your mistakes, surround yourself with people who will challenge you.
Be a student of life, always learning, always growing.
Exactly. Also, set clear priorities. Don't get lost in the weeds. Focus on what's important.
Be strategic with your time and energy.
Right. And finally, don't procrastinate. Take action when you need to.
Be thoughtful, but also decisive.
Find that balance between planning and doing.
Great advice. What's next on our strategic journey?
Let's talk about taking the initiative. Don't wait for things to happen, make them happen. Greene calls this, keep them on their heels, forcing strategies.
Okay, I like the sound of this one. Tell me more.
Greene uses Erwin Rommel, the desert fox. He was always on the attack, never giving his enemies a chance to settle in.
So be aggressive. Always be attacking.
Not necessarily aggressive, but definitely assertive and proactive. Set the pace, control the situation, keep them off balance.
Don't let them dictate the terms, you dictate the terms.
Exactly. Be the one in control, not the one reacting.
This sounds great for negotiations, competition, but how do we apply this to our daily lives?
Be the one who initiates contact, who brings up new ideas, who takes charge. Be visible, vocal. Don't wait for opportunities, create them.
Be a go-getter, a self-starter, a leader.
Exactly. Don't just wait for things to come to you. Go out and make them happen.
Love that. What else have we got?
Let's talk about shift the battlefield, forcing strategies.
Shifting the battlefield. Okay, I'm listening.
Sometimes you need to change the rules of the game, fight on your terms, find a situation where you have the advantage.
Give me an example.
Think of Hannibal crossing the Alps with elephants. He knew he couldn't win fighting the Romans conventionally, so he changed the game.
He found a way to use his strengths and exploit their weaknesses.
Exactly. So how can we shift the battlefield in our lives? We can't exactly bring elephants to work.
True. But I'm starting to see how it applies. It's about being creative, thinking outside the box, finding ways to change the dynamics of the situation.
Exactly. Sometimes the best way to win is to change the rules of the game.
Okay, so instead of feeling stuck in a situation, you find a way to reframe it, change the context, make it work for you.
Right. Shift the battlefield is about being adaptable, creative, and resourceful, finding that strategic advantage.
Brilliant. Okay, what's our next strategic lesson?
Let's talk about exploiting your opponent's emotions. Greene calls this compel mistakes, forcing strategies.
Okay, this sounds interesting. Tell me more.
It's about understanding your opponent's emotional weaknesses and using them to your advantage. Make them more likely to make mistakes.
So kind of like playing mind games.
Not exactly mind games, but you are using your knowledge of their personality and emotions to influence their behavior.
Okay, so how do we compel mistakes without being manipulative?
It starts with observation. Pay attention to how people react. What are their triggers? What makes them angry, frustrated, or insecure? Once you know their patterns, you can influence their behavior.
So gather intel, understand their weaknesses, and then create a situation where they're more likely to slip up.
Exactly. For example, if you know they make rash decisions under pressure, you might create a sense of urgency in a negotiation. Or if they have a big ego, you might flatter them.
Okay, so be strategic, understand human psychology, and use it to your advantage.
The key is to stay calm while your opponent loses their cool. That gives you the upper hand, and they're more likely to make mistakes that benefit you.
Okay, so it's like keep your cool and you'll rule.
Exactly. Let's revisit. Assume passive control. Forcing strategies. Remember FDR.
Yeah, how he influenced without seeming to be in control.
It's a powerful strategy, and we can all use it.
So be subtle, strategic, and play the long game.
Right. Let your opponent think they're in charge while you subtly guide them to where you want them to be.
Okay, I'm starting to get it. Can you give me another example?
Imagine you're in a meeting, and someone is pushing an idea you don't like. Instead of directly opposing them, try a more passive approach.
So instead of saying, that's a terrible idea, I say something like, that's interesting. Tell me more about how you see that working.
Exactly. You appear open, disarm their defenses, Create space for dialogue, and then you subtly guide the conversation, ask questions, raise concerns, and steer them towards a better solution.
Be strategic, diplomatic, and persuasive.
That's passive control. Use your influence subtly to achieve your goals without creating conflict.
Okay, valuable skill. What's next?
Let's talk about using fear and uncertainty as a deterrent. Remember Robert the Bruce and how he used reverse intimidation to discourage the English from invading Scotland?
Yeah, he was totally outmatched, but he made them think twice about attacking.
It's a strategy that can work in many areas of life. It's not about being physically intimidating, but about projecting confidence and strength. That makes people hesitate before messing with you.
So, set boundaries. Stand up for yourself. Let people know you're not someone to be taken advantage of.
Right, you're building a reputation as someone who's not to be messed with.
But how do we do that without being a jerk?
It's not about being a jerk, it's about being assertive and setting clear boundaries. Let people know you respect yourself and expect the same from them.
Okay, so it's about inner strength, quiet confidence, commanding respect without being aggressive.
Exactly. Project an aura of power, make people think twice before crossing you.
Okay, I'm ready for the next strategy. What else can we learn?
Let's revisit sever the roots. Grand strategy. Remember, it's about getting to the root of the problem.
Yeah, understanding the underlying issues and addressing those, not just the symptoms.
It works in all areas of life. Personal relationships, business, even global politics.
Okay, so how do we sever the roots in real life? Give me an example.
Let's say you have a recurring problem at work. Communication breakdown, lack of resources, personality conflict. Instead of just reacting, ask yourself, what's the root cause of this problem?
So, be a detective. Investigate the situation. Figure out what's really going on.
Right. Maybe there are unclear roles or a lack of trust. Once you identify the root cause, you can find a better solution.
Not just putting out fires, but preventing them from starting.
Exactly. Be proactive, strategic, and remember that the best solution might not be the most obvious one.
All right, let's move on to take the indirect route to your goal. Grand strategy.
This one is about being flexible, creative, and realizing that the most direct path isn't always the best way to achieve your goals.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more about this indirect route.
Think about Alexander the Great, who would often take these roundabout routes to reach his objectives. Sometimes it's better to go around an obstacle, not over it. He understood that sometimes it's better to outflank your opponent, attack from an unexpected angle, create confusion and disorientation.
So instead of charging straight ahead, you might zigzag your way to the goal, keep your opponent guessing.
Exactly. It's about being adaptable, creative, and always thinking a few steps ahead.
Okay, but how do we apply that to, like, everyday life? It's not like we're leading armies.
Of course not, but the idea still works. Think about a goal you're trying to reach, something tough, a real challenge. What if, instead of tackling it head on, you break it down? Smaller steps, maybe a less obvious route, but one that gets you there in the end.
Okay, so instead of climbing Mount Everest all at once, you set up base camps along the way.
That's a great analogy. Or think about negotiating with someone who's really stubborn, resistant to your ideas. Instead of forcing it, what if you try a different approach? Build some rapport, find common ground, establish trust, and then later on, you can bring up the tough stuff.
I see. So it's about building that relationship, creating a foundation of trust, and then subtly guiding the conversation where you want it to go.
Exactly. The indirect route is often more effective because it bypasses your opponent's defenses, You disarm their resistance, and you can achieve your goals with less conflict, more finesse.
That's brilliant. Take the indirect route is definitely going in my strategic toolkit. What's next?
Let's talk about staying grounded, focused, adaptable, no matter what's happening, whether you're succeeding or facing setbacks. Greene calls this combat the two dangers of grand strategy. Grand strategy.
Two dangers of grand strategy. That sounds ominous. What are we talking about here?
The first one is arrogance. You start achieving success. It's easy to get overconfident. You think you're invincible. You stop listening to advice. You stop considering other perspectives.
I feel like that saying, pride comes before the fall.
Exactly. The second danger is paralysis. This happens when you get overwhelmed by information, options, possibilities. You end up feeling stuck. Can't make a decision, can't take action.
It's like analysis paralysis. You overthink everything and you end up going nowhere.
Exactly. So how do we avoid these traps? Arrogance and paralysis, they can derail even the best strategies.
Well, you mentioned earlier that it starts with humility.
Right. No matter how successful you get, remember, you don't know everything. Be open to feedback. Learn from your mistakes. And surround yourself with people who will challenge you and keep you grounded.
So it's about being a lifelong learner, being open to new ideas, and recognizing that there's always room for improvement.
Exactly. It's also about being smart with your time and energy. Set clear priorities, focus on the most important tasks, and don't get lost in the weeds.
Don't sweat the small stuff.
Yeah.
Focus on what matters.
Right. And finally, don't put things off. Maintain a sense of urgency, avoid procrastination, and take action when you need to.
So it's a balance. Be thoughtful and strategic,
Yeah.
but also be decisive and take action.
Exactly. Find that balance between thinking and doing.
Okay, so much great advice. As we wrap up our deep dive into Robert Greene's The 33 Strategies of War, what's the big takeaway? What do you really want our listeners to remember?
Remember that these strategies aren't about manipulating or exploiting people. It's about understanding the dynamics of power, recognizing the patterns in how people behave. Use that knowledge to navigate conflict, achieve your goals, and ultimately live a more fulfilling and empowered life.
I love that. It's about being strategic, not just tactical. See the bigger picture, understand how things work, and then use that knowledge to make smart decisions and achieve greater success in every area of your life. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.